Well, hello there. Hi. Welcome to the Pitch Grid, the podcast that brings you insight, news, and analysis from both sides of the footballing world, the NFL and the EFL Championship. We have got a stacked episode for you today, folks. So let's get right into it. Thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. Let's head grid side and talk NFL. So, over the weekend, news broke that Nick Chubb was going to sign with the Houston Texans pending a physical, and Monday that actually became official. So, huge news with, this kind of came out of nowhere because, Chubb was considered to be a high trade possibility. The Bears were heavily rumored and linked with Chubb, particularly. That would have been a cool move to see him and DeAndre Swift team up. But all of a sudden, this came out of nowhere, and I see the vision, right? I can see the vision with, Joe Mixon and a Nick Chubb duo. My thing is with injuries. Injuries are a huge thing with Nick Chubb, if you follow the league, Nick Chubb, a couple years ago, tore his ACL in Pittsburgh. It was a gruesome injury. And then last year he came back and was playing well until he broke his ankle. And now he's sidelined until October. Now, what that means, I would love to know. Because that's my huge concern with this move. Like, if we're getting the Nick Chubb of old, the shifty, athletic bruiser that can also, when needed to, passes out of the backfield, I'm all for it. Like, this could be an incredible signing then. My concern is that going to be the same Nick Chubb that we're going to get now in Houston after 2 straight years with gruesome, hard to come back from injuries? Granted, this is not the back-to-back Achilles or ACLs for example, Deshaun Watson is going through. However, the injury concerns are real, and I think you need to keep that in mind, especially considering this is a Houston team that is dealing with a ton of injuries. CJ Stroud right now is dealing with a shoulder injury that's not being very much discussed right now. You have Tank Dell that's out for the season with the awful injury he had at Arrowhead in December. And then you have Nico Collins has had injury concerns, and Mixon has had his issues as well. So I think on paper it's a very good offense. I love the look of it. A great tandem in Mixon and Chubb. Like, if they go with, say, Nick Chubb as a third down back, right? He's the bruiser. He's going to get that extra yard that you need. And Mixon is like the first two downs. Man, that could be a great tandem. It would take a lot of pressure off of both of them to have extensive loads to carry in the season because, as the season goes on, those carries start to add up and it's only going to pile up and get worse. So it's great to have the tandems, and tandems seem to be becoming more and more of a trend here in the league lately because of the load of carries and all that, because running backs these days are not built to carry like an Emmett Smith or LaDainian Tomlinson used to carry, right? So it's good to have these tandems now. You see like DJ Giddens and Jonathan Taylor teaming up in Indianapolis, for example, or, Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco in Kansas City. This, to me, if this offense is going to get going, it's going to very much depend on if CJ Stroud can take the step up, right? Because he had the incredible first season that put him on the spotlight immediately and had such high expectations for him. Then last year he came down to earth, had a 20 touchdown, 12 interception year, and the sophomore slump is incredibly real for a lot of quarterbacks. However, we have seen examples of that not being true, like with Josh Allen, who, just last year won the MVP, and he had a terrible second season, but has incredibly bounced back. And so, if CJ Stroud is able to bounce back, and this running back tandem now that Houston is cooking up could solve a lot of that because it takes a lot of pressure off of him to be incredible, to be great. And I think that might have been part of why last year he wasn't so good because it was very much on him. Mixon was, a good running back, but when he wasn't around or hurt, and it very much fell on CJ Stroud, and I feel like that definitely is not good. It was not a good pressure for him to have. So I could definitely see the tandem taking a ton of pressure off, and if it works, boy, Houston could go places. Houston could absolutely do some damage in the AFC. They got the wide receivers from Iowa State in this draft, and that adds some much needed depth. You've got the defense with young, hungry talent, the likes of Derek Stingley and Will Anderson. This is a team that's young, it's hungry, it wants to prove itself. And next year is the year to do it because CJ Stroud's now going into his third year, and I'm sure they're going to pick up his fifth year extension. Then they'll have to decide if they need to pay him next year. If he does, depending on this season, I'm sure that will be a huge part of it. So they're trying to build around CJ Stroud. I love it. I think it's a smart move to try to help take the pressure off of him, maybe address a weakness that probably was the running back room. Because after Mixon in that depth chart, it did feel like a bit of a cliff drop off in terms of what you had in terms of production in that backfield. So it's good to see that. It's good to see also that Nick Chubb gets another chance, another crack at trying to be a starter because the Browns were not going to be exactly the place he was going to go. They drafted Quinshon Judkins. Rome 4 has proven that he's a solid running back in this league. So it definitely felt like the Browns were going to go in another direction. Quinshon Judkins, of course, is going to be the stud. Nick Chubb, of course, with his injury concerns, said, okay, we have to let you go. It's unfortunate because another Cleveland player has to go. Another great one, too. Hopefully he does well. I do kind of think it was actually kind of a smart move by Cleveland to let him go, even if, they probably could have needed it, the extra depth. But three running backs, one which probably would demand more carries, that would just add some extra tension. So I can totally see why Cleveland wanted to let him go. Bears definitely let this slip out of their hands as well because, man, that could have been a great pairing right behind Caleb Williams and also would have taken a lot of pressure off of him as well. Man, it's crazy just to think about. The implications of this are just so fascinating. And you love to think about this kind of thing because now this changes, I think. It could change a lot of people's perception of this Texans team because I think people still had them winning the division. I don't think anyone had that changing, right? But still, how far they could go in the playoffs and all that. If this works out, this could absolutely propel them to maybe new heights that we haven't seen for the Texans franchise ever. They've never been to an AFC championship game in franchise history. D'Amico Ryans has only had this team going up. So it's going to be incredibly fascinating to see how this plays out. Another huge weekend bit of news was the Jair Alexander was let go by the Packers after couple of drama-laden years with the franchise, and he wanted a restructure of his contract, right? He wanted to get paid max salary, and that's totally fair. He's a multi-Pro Bowler, multi-All-Pro, one of the best corners the Packers have had in recent memory after Charles Woodson. Now, the question is this the right move? And I can see both ways. I've known several Packers fans said this was the right move because he's very injury prone, and I can see that. He's in the last 2 years, he's been in and out of the lineup with injuries. A lot of people are saying that's partly because he wants the contract and he's doing it. He's trying to make it a little bit more lingering or taking longer because of that. I don't see him being that petty, but he's talented. He's one, coming out of Louisville. I don't think many people knew what to expect from him, and he played amazing. And now he's going to have to prove it to the open market that he's actually marketable to other teams. And who's going to want him? Because the Packers are not. I can see why the Packers didn't want to pay him max salary because of the injury concerns. Not only that, they probably feel like they've addressed the cornerback issue with other pieces the last couple of years because they've had to fill in for Alexander. I mean, they've got Bo Melton, doing his thing at quarterback now, apparently in OTAs. So that could be an interesting thing to monitor as well. I do feel like the Packers defense might take a step back now, though because the secondary just feels very shallow, and that could be a huge issue coming into the season. I really am that's a huge worry for them because last year the defense was rather solid. However, if they find a quality depth piece in the free agent market somewhere, that probably could solve a lot of the issues there. Where does Alexander go from here, right? I don't know. My first thought when this news broke was the Bears. I had some people I knew say the Lions. I went immediately the Bears or the Commanders because they have the cap. They are one of the teams that are up there with a lot of money to spend. You could also say the Raiders are a possibility. The Patriots, pair him with Christian Gonzalez. Like, could you imagine? Like, that's already a team on the rise. That's a great secondary tandem if on paper at least, because if Alexander's actually healthy, if he actually can go back to being the quarter that we know, and on paper that can be a dangerous secondary in waiting. The Raiders, if he were to go there, they have the money to shell it out and give it to him. That would be a huge move to upgrade that secondary because they need to upgrade the secondary. Yes, they've got pieces, but it feels like they need to upgrade the secondary, and that would be a perfect way to do it. I just don't know if they're going to shell that money out. And that's the problem. I don't know how many teams are actually going to do it because of these injury concerns and all that. It's definitely going to be something to watch, especially coming into like training camp as in July when it comes up. That will be a huge storyline, I'm sure. And you want to bring him in sooner rather than later because of that, because you want him to gel with the team. You want him to be able to have that chemistry in the secondary so the communication doesn't feel awkward and, your season is done, halfway through. The the Okay, this came to me right now, right? The Panthers. What if the Panthers were to try to make a move, right? I'm not saying it's good possible. They've had the cap this year, right? But they spent it a lot. They spent it a lot in free agency to try to make themselves better, and they have in a lot of areas. However, their defense wasn't great. Could Alexander be the answer to some of that? Maybe it's possible. I just don't know if they have the ability to sign him. So a lot of interesting places he could go, a lot of interesting ways he could upgrade different teams. I'm so fascinated to see what happens with that. Another interesting bit of news was J.K. Dobbins also signed a 1-year contract. It was worth $5.25 million. He signed with division rival Denver. He joins a crowded running back room. He played 13 games last year, career high 905 yards with 9 touchdowns. Is he worth it? Is he worth this price? I mean, yes, he had a great year last year, like we said, career high 905 yards, right? So definitely still has the production to do it. And that was after some injuries as well. So 905 yards, missing some games. That's pretty good, especially when he hasn't been a feature running back a lot in his career. So there's promise here. However, you have a couple other running back options, including UCF standout RJ Harvey that the Broncos drafted. I do think it's going to probably be Dobbins' job to lose as RB1 unless otherwise said. However, I'm so fascinated because like I would love to see RJ Harvey start because when watching him in college, he was electric. I loved seeing his mentality and how competitive he was, and he was the main star of that UCF offense, and he looked so good, and I think he fits perfectly in Denver, right behind Bo Nix and an O line that, isn't great, but it's improving. You know, it's an offense that needs some improvement, but it's getting there. And the Broncos are definitely going to be this brings stability to the Broncos, is what I'm trying to say. It brings a bit more depth to a position that was considered one of their weaker spots. So it's definitely a good move, I think. Overall, if Dobbins keeps up this production, yeah, I don't see why him and maybe again it goes back to this running back tandem that we talked about with Chubb and Mixon, right? Tandems are becoming a thing here in the league lately. So taking the pressure off of like RJ Harvey to have to be running back one right away is probably a good thing. So, and to have him sit behind J.K. Dobbins isn't a bad thing either. So I could totally see that. And I'm kind of excited to see this Broncos running back room and this Broncos team as a whole. The defense looks good and the offense is starting to look pretty nasty too. If Bo Nix can take the step up, the Broncos have a lot of potential. And I'm excited to see what that looks like. Some mini camp news. We're going to talk some holdouts here. TJ Watt and Trey Hendrickson. Of course, TJ Watt, you have the Aaron Rodgers signing. He signed for 13.5, I think, or 13.25 million, and with guarantees, incentives, all that, that can rise up to around 19.5 million, I believe. So it's close to 20 million, not quite there, but it's rather cheap for a veteran quarterback who had a quiet, if you look at the stats, solid season, even if it wasn't the best year looking at it from an outside perspective and just looking at it from like news and on the field and off the field issues. It definitely doesn't look good, but like his stats weren't that bad. However, my thing is you're signing Aaron Rodgers, right? If you're the Steelers, you've decided that you do not want to commit to the future yet. You want yet another plaster option. We've talked about the plaster option here on the show before. So now why are you neglecting the star of your defense, the crown jewel that is TJ Watt? He has been angling for a deal for a while, and he is undoubtedly a star in this league, in the face, one of the faces of this league, and yet you're not going to pay him what he wants or what he deserves. He's led the league in sacks multiple times. He came out of college on fire. He's excellent, and he deserves top linebacker money, top market money for what he's done and given to your franchise. And this is a team that normally, keeps things behind closed doors. It doesn't normally go public with a lot of things. They had since Chuck Noll, really, they haven't gotten away from that. And we're probably not going to know much of what's going on. However, why are you addressing your offense and not your defense? Why are you trying to become the Bengals? And we're going to get to the Bengals in a minute, I promise. But is signing a free agent quarterback becoming a more and more risky proposition in today's league? Like, okay, think about this, right? We had Rodgers sign with the Jets a couple of years ago, and he got injured year one. And then last year, of course, happened. The Jets were not that great. And now he signs with the Steelers, and you're putting on hold a lot of your future plans as a front office, as a GM. You're not really looking ahead, it feels like. And then you have other teams, just looking back at the recent past, the Broncos, before they got Bo Nix, had like Case Keenum and Teddy Bridgewater and Joe Flacco and a whole bunch of quarterback options. Look at the Browns. The Browns have become the poster child for this. Steelers last year with Russ, or the Broncos with Russ. This is signing a free agent quarterback thing becoming a bit of a risky proposition because you don't know what you're going to expect, especially like even if they're good or their career has been great, right? They just haven't fully worked out in some way or another. And it's fascinating to see how nowadays it feels like the better option is just to go with your rookie, build around him in a few years. Because nowadays, while it's not always the case, a lot of the time it feels like quarterbacks are becoming more and more pro ready. So why would you not build around that quarterback and sign the stars and keep him around and keep him happy, keep them happy, and make the locker room great? Like with the Chiefs, they've kept Chris Jones around. They kept Travis Kelsey and with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, yes, Chris Jones had the spat where he held out a couple of games and then he came back, but then they signed him last year in free agency. And, now they have their core pieces intact and they really don't have a ton of people they really need to sign. They just need to keep restructuring and all that. So it feels like this is kind of the pattern now. And it's the same thing with the Bengals and Trey Hendrickson, right? You're not paying your defensive star who led the league in sacks last year, right? And you're paying the offense all kinds of money. It feels like the answer isn't pay the offense all the money, right? And then ignore the defense. And I don't think the Steelers have done that this year, right? They aren't exactly the Bengals. They have addressed the defense. Like they got Darius Slay, for example, I believe, in corner. So they haven't totally ignored it. And they've addressed, I think, a lot of the issues there. But still, you're ignoring the one piece of this franchise that could maybe be a presence in the locker room, and maybe if things go south with Aaron Rodgers, could back him and be a steady voice of reason in TJ Watt. I don't know. To me, that this adds extra drama to the Steelers camp, and it just is crazy to think that this is kind of the Steelers of our day right now. When I grew up, that was not how the Steelers operated at all. It felt more like they valued defense more, and now all of a sudden it's kind of flipped, and it's just fascinating. Going back to Trey Hendrickson and the Bengals, um, let's get to our state of the team segment because the Bengals are that. They finished 9-8 last season and they missed the playoffs barely. However, what in the actual yuck is that offseason by the Bengals right now? I mean, we talked about how Trey Hendrickson's being ignored. He's holding out from minicamp, right? But not only is he holding out, and he's disgruntled with the ownership, as we have documented on this show, as we have documented that Joe Burrow has told the front office and coaching staff that he wants Trey Hendrickson in that locker room, or else he's not going to be very happy. And obviously, they're not doing a great job of it. Ownership isn't said to Hendrickson as well, according to him and according to their actual words at the owners' meetings. Take our money that we're offering you and shut up. Well, Trey Hendrickson has not shut up, and good for him because he deserves top of the line linebacker money for not only just being a great linebacker, but he led the league in sacks last year. And then you come to what has also become a recent situation, and that's the Shamar Stewart situation. Now, Shamar Stewart was the first round pick by the Bengals out of Texas A&M. He's an edge rusher as well. You obviously thought when they drafted him, well, they're expecting that this is the guy they'll replace Trey Hendrickson with, because Hendrickson, they're either expecting him to leave next year or they're just not paying him. And this is okay, if he holds out, this is the guy to replace him. Because as a team, when you draft someone in the first round, you obviously expect them to either start or be very close to starting. And you expect them to become a star. And what they're not doing with Stewart is he has gone very public with this and said that they are not offering him guarantees that normal first round picks would get. That's insane, right? Like, why are you not offering him the guarantees, the incentives to that as a first round pick he is entitled to? Like, he said that this is what they've offered other first round picks in past years, and yet they're not offering it to him. So either they don't fully believe in Shamar Stewart, and I don't think a lot of people do lately. A lot of people have coined him a kind of a potential bust pick in this draft, and I kind of tend to side with that maybe somewhat, but that's beside the point. You're the Bengals, you drafted this guy, you think he's going to be good, apparently. Why are you not giving him the money? And you're not giving Trey Hendrickson the money. What has this defense done to the front office that just has hurt their soul? I mean, my word, can they be more obvious that they just hate defense and love offense in Cincinnati? And the fans don't deserve this. They don't deserve to see their franchise going up in smoke around them in a Super Bowl window with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, who are two franchise cornerstones, or they will be franchise legends by the time they retire. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have paid a Chase and Burrow, right? Absolute legends. But why are you paying T. Higgins $30 million as a wide receiver too, when you're already paying Jamar Chase the most non-quarterback money ever in NFL history, and you're paying Joe Burrow top 10 quarterback money? Now your cap is taken up by 3 players mostly. It's not entirely, but mostly taken up by 3 players. That's insane. I just don't understand why in general, but why they will pay these generous amounts. And they addressed, like, a couple of years ago, they addressed with Mike Gesicki at tight end. He's a great tight end, and he was for them last year. Of course, they drafted, like, Eric All. So they tried to address the O-line in this draft as well, and they tried in free agency. And at the same time, they let Jermaine Pratt go as well, a top 10 leader in tackles in the league last year. Eh, this is a team that, on paper, you would put incredibly high on power rankings because they're so talented on the offensive side of the ball. They can score video game numbers on you. But at the same time, they will score 70 on your butt, but then they'll allow 70 on their own butt. And that's why last year they missed the playoffs. It feels very cyclical to me that they are going every year, they are addressing offense, ignoring defense. Addressing offense, getting so close, the defense just lets them down a little bit. It just feels very similar to that situation as well from last couple of years. I don't know if they can keep this up for much longer as a franchise, because Burrow and Chase can't carry this team forever on their backs. Joe Burrow is getting up there. This is like his 7th or 8th season in the league now. Jamar Chase is getting older as well. Uh, and you are in their primes. You are trying to get them a Super Bowl. You're trying to get this franchise a Super Bowl, and yet it's going up in smoke because you can't address the weaknesses. If it's not that, what is it? Like, is Zach Taylor on the hot seat if they don't make the playoffs again? And if that's the case, if Zach Taylor is on the hot seat, how much longer is this Bengals window going to be open? Like, yes, we could say, okay, as long as Joe Burrow is the quarterback. Yes, but how much longer? Because he has injury concerns as well in his past. He has the ACL injury, he has the elbow, he has the hand, and now how much longer is this going to last without him eventually getting killed behind an O-line because they don't address it quite well enough and they don't address the defense? And is Zach Taylor to blame for that? Maybe part of this is he's telling the front office what he wants, and he wants the offense to be good, right? He's an offensive coach. That's why they got him as a coach, because he could mentor Joe Burrow. Okay, now what? Now, are you going to take the next step, Bengals? Are you going to be able to do that? Because I don't know if you can. And that's just frustrating to watch. As an outsider, it feels frustrating because you see all these great legendary players, and yet they're not getting what they deserve because a front office and ownership is being stingy with their money because they don't want to pay certain players in certain positions of weaknesses that they don't want to pay them the right amounts that they deserve. And that's only going to cause tension. That's only going to cause friction in that locker room, in that facility, because players are going to feel like, okay, I got to watch my back now because are they going to pay me when I need a contract coming up? I'm sure that's going to be a case with a lot of these players. Like, I think they brought back Sheldon Rankins, maybe. Why are you bringing back Sheldon Rankins? When he was okay, but he wasn't great either. I don't know. To me, there's a lot of questions that the Bengals have, and I don't know how they're going to be answered easily, especially if they don't want to pay Trey Hendrickson. And it feels like this window is closing fast, way faster than we would have thought just 2 years ago when they made the AFC Championship game and lost it. It's a very confusing, conflicting situation. I just don't know how in the world that's gonna end up. Another interesting situation coming out of OTAs. Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis has been dealing with a shoulder injury. Shane Steichen was not very specific about what exactly this injury was. And to me, this opens up a golden pathway for Daniel Jones to become quarterback one in Indianapolis. Now, hear me out. I think a lot of people are kind of getting tired of Anthony Richardson. His first year when he got injured, everyone was like, oh, that's unfortunate, but he looked great and played well. So they kind of gave him a pass. Well, second year, of course, we had the whole incident that's become almost synonymous with him at this point is him tapping out of the game when he was tired. And I think a lot of people just associate with him that moment. Now, do I think that's totally fair? Probably not. And in some ways, yes, it can be because it shows his competitive mentality as a whole, and you don't want that kind of quarterback. However, I don't know if he's been given much of a chance to prove himself. I mean, when he was out there, he wasn't great, but it feels like he's been given a limited amount of games. But to me, now this opens a pathway for Daniel Jones to become quarterback one. And, this is a guy that was a first round pick by the Giants. He had that one good year, was coined Danny Dimes, and then after that, it kind of just fell off. Now, we could say that is the Giants organization as a whole, or we could say this Daniel Jones, and I would say it's probably both. Daniel Jones is not perfect by any means. However, if he's surrounded with the right amount of talent, he's got Jonathan Taylor, one of the best running backs in the league, and I think Jonathan Taylor's kind of being slept on this year. And why are we not thinking that Daniel Jones could have a shot in Indianapolis, especially if Richardson is out for a significant amount of time, say into training camp, right? We don't know because Steichen is not being very clear on this issue. I would love to see Daniel Jones get another shot and see if he can't take advantage of it. If he does, that would be awesome. Like, kind of an underrated move by the Colts front office, who's kind of starting to get some flack because they really haven't drafted well in recent years. They haven't seemed to really build something of late, and, they have some talent, but it just doesn't seem to be quite clicking. And, they come close to the playoffs. I think they missed the playoffs the year that Stroud's rookie year, they missed the playoffs in that final game when they played in the final game of the season. But now, if Daniel Jones, let's just say he were to take advantage of this, what does this mean for Anthony Richardson's career, right? Does this mean that they're going to release him maybe and admit that he was a bust? I would say probably. If Daniel Jones were to do even decently and lead the team maybe to an 8-9 record, I think that's enough for probably where Indianapolis is like, okay, we're paying this guy money and Daniel Jones. We aren't paying Anthony Richardson much. Why not just let him go and see if he can't go elsewhere and maybe find another shot at this? I mean, it's unfortunate for Anthony Richardson in a way, but also in another way, it kind of is what he's deserved because of his mentality, his competitive spirit. And apparently at OTAs, he hasn't done much better when he was playing. So I think this is a golden opportunity for Daniel Jones to put his stamp on the Colts. Another interesting thing that's come out of the AFC South, Cam Ward is starting to get more and more rave reviews, not just from videos on social media, but also his coach is starting to talk about him in ways that are fascinating and intriguing to me, right? So Brian Callahan has come out and said that recently Cam Ward has been coming into the facilities at like 5 a.m. Now, that doesn't mean anything, right? You could come in early and still be a terrible quarterback, right? But still, at the same time, it's this number one overall pick. You don't always see that with players, especially these days. Being able to go into the facility early and leave late. But apparently, that's what Cam Ward is doing. I mean, if this hype is true, and sometimes coaches gas up their quarterbacks a ton, we all know that. But at the same time, the reviews are starting to get consistent. We're starting to see more and more of a consistent theme that, okay, this guy actually might be good. This guy has good arm angles. This guy has good velocity on his throws. Again, this is without pads, so we're not going to know much. He's throwing to air, as some would say. I would agree with that to an extent. However, if coaches are telling something, they've seen something, there's usually something behind it. I mean, just look at, and I'm going to use this example again, Mahomes. When he was in his first starting year, Louis Riddick came on Stephen A's show and was talking about how Mahomes is getting these rave reviews, and Stephen A is asking him, like, what about his accuracy, his quickness, his throws? Riddick just stops him. Everything. And you know what? It turned out to be true because now Mahomes is a three-time Super Bowl champion, the best quarterback in the league, in my opinion. And and I mean, I'm not going to say Cam Ward is Patrick Mahomes in the flesh coming again as a first-round pick. No, I'm not going to say that. We need to see him in pads. I need to see him in action more. But the reviews are getting consistent. They're getting louder. And to me, that is nothing but good news for Titans fans. Have the Titans actually found the answer to their quarterback woes? Like, have we actually finally found someone that isn't Ryan Tannehill that the Titans can actually draft a quarterback after Will Levis's dreadful year? And have they actually found the answer? I don't know. I want to say yes because he has all the intangibles, all the ability to do it. This doesn't feel like just a fluke review or two. This doesn't feel like just a highlight video on social media. This feels like actual something tangible is going on in Nashville, and there's kind of some excitement to it, and it's kind of cool to see. And I really want to keep an eye on that because that could be amazing to look at. Here's the crazy thing that came out of OTAs as well. Apparently, Sean McVay said that Aaron Rodgers was almost a LA Ram. In a press conference, he said that before Stafford signed his extension, the Rams were doing their homework on Aaron Rodgers and were very much looking at it, bringing him into SoFi Stadium. Man, could you imagine? Like, wow, that would be crazy to think about, like, him going back with Devontae Adams. I think this was after they signed Devontae Adams. So it's just Rodgers just following Devontae Adams around the earth at this point because he just doesn't have anywhere else to go. And of course, he's now signed with the Steelers, and they signed Stafford. I think signing Stafford is the good move because he has connection with the team. He's a captain, and he's been rejuvenated as a quarterback there in LA. However, it just is fascinating to know that this is kind of a thing that actually was going on in league circles. And it's, Sean McVay, he's very candid, and he's also very blunt. He's not very shy about hiding what he thinks. It's just fascinating to hear him say that because, man, the implications are kind of fascinating to think about. Even though it didn't happen, the what if would have been fascinating to think about. If it had happened, wow, that the outlook on this Rams team, I think, would be totally different than it is right now. Because right now the stock is incredibly high on the LA Rams, and I do think they're going to win their division this year. But like, if they had signed Rodgers, I think we're having a totally different conversation about them right now. It's more like, oh well, they're bringing the drama to LA. It's box office drama. And Devontae Adams paired up with him again. Yeah, that would be just high peak content for Hard Knocks almost again. Even though they did that with the Jets. No, I don't know. That would be kind of interesting. So, anyways, just a fun little tidbit. I saw this article while looking at news and some other takes that people were having. And okay, so Tim Brown, he's the legendary Raiders receiver. He's a Hall of Famer. He is now the chairman of the Arena Football League. And he's come out and said that he was asked if he had one rule from the Arena League that he could bring to the NFL, what would it be? And Tim Brown said he would remove kickers. Now, of course, this is a huge debate right now. Why, of course, the league has started moving the touchback line, why they're reinventing kickoffs, all of that. I don't know the exact rules for Arena League, but I mean, we already see like the UFL is kind of phasing them out with all the 2-point conversions and the 1-point conversions. There's no, PATs anymore. It's just converting with one single play. So why would that not come to the UFL? Like, it's fascinating to think about because, of course, now you have a lot of kickers these days who are booting 60-yard field goals almost consistently and 50-yard or 60-yarders. Like, it's not much of a rarity anymore. It's becoming more and more common. However, at the same time, people think it's a boring play. The kickoff is a boring play, which I would tend to debate with that. But anyways, touchbacks are becoming are concerned, and people didn't like how touchbacks were becoming a thing every time on kickoffs. So they said, okay, let's reinvent the kickoff last year, and it's becoming a thing this year too. So yeah, I mean, I could totally see this actually happening in a few years if the touchback thing doesn't work out and like they decide to bring UFL rules into this. I think that UFL could probably be an experiment ground that already the NFL has dipped into with the kicker situation, the touchback situation. So why not dip into maybe Arena League or otherwise just to see, how it works. Maybe they start doing like instead like UFL extra points where they go like from the 1, the 2, or the 3 and have different lines of scrimmage to do extra point conversions. So I don't know, that could be fascinating to see. Like, could you imagine just not having kickers at all? Like, man, that would be something else to think about because I've grown up with like great kickers like Adam Vinatieri, Greg the Legs Zerline, and now that could possibly be gone in a few years. Like, that's insane to think about. Just a fascinating topic, really, in my opinion, just because of how already the discussion around kickers is becoming louder and louder, and now all of a sudden this came up with a former player, no less. So I don't know what I don't know if I would like it personally, but I could totally see that happening. Um, Here was an interesting little topic here that someone brought up to me, and I wanted to do it. The best centers of the Twins. So we had a lot of good centers in the Twins, right? Some were better than others. You want to know? So I had to go and rank my top 5 centers of the Twins. Now I don't know if this is going to be anything too serious, but have a debate with yourselves. I went with number 5 is Travis Frederick from the Cowboys. He was a 3-time Pro Bowler. He was an All-Pro in 2016, second team All-Pro twice, and he was the George Halas winner. I think he was such an integral part of that Cowboys O-line when they were really good. They had, Tyron Smith, and it was considered one of the best O-lines in the league at the time, and especially when Dak came into the league. It was still considered amazing and one of the top lines in the league. And now not so much. They're rebuilding it, but still, Travis Frederick was the heart and soul of it at center, and of course, centers being the quarterback of the offensive line, he very much was integral in making sure that they worked as a well-oiled machine. Alex Mack was next for me, the former Brown, Falcon, and 49er. He was a 7-time Pro Bowler, 3 times second team All Pro and all decades 2010 team, according to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I remember him mostly for his Falcons days, but I don't know. He was so solid. He wasn't really talked about much, but like looking at his stats, like I was shocked he had 7 Pro Bowls. And I mean, yes, he 3 times second team. He wasn't first team, but still, he was solid, and you really never had a complaint about him. You always just knew that he was going to be there, play in, play out, and just help the Falcons or the Browns. And he was one of the few Browns offensive linemen or players that were solid as well, and you knew you could count on him to be great. At number 3, I had Marquise Pouncey, one of the more decorated centers in that era. He was a 9-time Pro Bowler, 2-time first team All Pro, 3-time second team All Pro. He was also an all decades 2010 team. Okay, with these top 3 guys, I went down a rabbit hole, and because I'm going to get to why in a little bit. But I went and looked at total penalties that these guys had. So Marquise Pouncey, he only had 24 total penalties in his time as a player when he played a decade with the Steelers. And that's mind-boggling. In a decade with one team, you only have 24 penalties? That's insane. Like, I knew like how good Marquise Pouncey was, right? Him and his brother were considered one of the 2 best offensive linemen in the league when they played. And but I didn't know he had this many Pro Bowls. He was, of course, a first team All Pro, and goodness, just so decorated. But then the penalties on top of that, just like the few amount of penalties in a league where holding is called or could be called a lot, and people argue about it a lot. So now it is just fascinating to me to see that. And okay, we get then the top two might be contentious, but hear me out. Okay, Jason Kelsey is number two. I love Jason Kelsey. Great guy, amazing player as well. He was a Super Bowl champ. He was a six-time All-Pro, seven-time Pro Bowler, iconic personality. Love the New Heights podcast. Him and Travis crushed that. And I definitely think he'll be a Hall of Famer very soon. However, let's go back to the all-time penalties thing. How many penalties do you think that Jason Kelsey had in his career? He had 61 total penalties. That's crazy, right? Like, we think that he was like he was very consistent. He was very crucial to that Eagles O line, especially when they won that Super Bowl, and then when they lost the Super Bowl to the Chiefs with Hurts. It's when you think of centers, you think of Jason Kelsey nowadays, and he's the gold standard for it. I just had to put him at number two because yes, he's great, but the guy in front of him just felt like the best. And part of it also was I just had to because of the total penalties thing. So Jeff Saturday is my number one. He's a Super Bowl champ as well. He was a six-time Pro Bowler, two-time first-team All-Pro. He is a Colts Ring of Honor inductee. He started 202 games out of in 14 years. He actually has a touchdown to his name as well. It was a fumble return in 2006. You want to know how many total penalties Jeff Saturday had in his career? 24. He had 24 total penalties to his name in a 14-year career. Do you realize how insane that is? Like I said, 24 and 10 was insane. But 24 and 14, that's less than a penalty a year. And some of these years, you go look at Pro Football Reference. Some of these years he did not have a single penalty to his name. Talk about consistent. Jeff Saturday to me just screams the gold standard of offensive line. Right below him is Jason Kelsey, and they aren't that far apart. They're very close together. You have to put those two at the top, but that total penalties thing just boggled my mind doing the research for this episode. Absolutely insane. Love this topic. It was so fun to research, and I went down so many rabbit holes as a result of it. And I love giving praise to the guys in the trenches as well, because those guys also were cool as well. One of my underrated ones was Olin Kreutz from the Bears, and also I wanted to shout out Rodney Hudson of the Chiefs and the Raiders. I feel like he was also a very underrated center. Both of them, though, they didn't have a lot of the accolades or the stats, but they still were very solid and were always showing up for their teams and were very consistent and probably the best parts of those O lines for both of their teams. So I wanted to give those two a shout out because they were absolute legends as well, even if they didn't quite make the cut for me. Speaking of throwback, speaking of going back to the past slightly, I want to talk about Michael Vick. This was suggested when we brought up topics for the show to discuss, and I wanted to bring, and it was discussed. How important was he to the game then and now? I mean, Michael Vick, let's think about this. This was a guy that was drafted out of Virginia Tech. He was hyped, and he had all the hype behind him, and he showed it why he had the hype. My word, one of the flashiest players of all time. He could run. He was dodgy. He was quick. He was athletic. Everyone wanted to be like Mike. There was the I want to be like Mike campaign. There was the Michael Vick experience. I mean, there was everything when he took off in Atlanta. My word, it was his future bright. And of course, he had his off the field issues, all that. And also, I want to shout out the Sports PSP podcast because they talked about Michael Vick as well in their latest episode. And they brought up how not only was he influential in just Atlanta itself, but also how influential he was in the hip hop scene and the pop culture scene as well, and how he was in a lot of like rap videos and a lot of like I said, commercials and all of that. The I want to be like my campaign, of course. It's just crazy how influential he was, not only just like as a player and in the pop culture, but also like video games. Like playing in Michael Vick in Madden, that was like a cheat code. Like you couldn't beat Michael Vick in that game, and still he's still considered one of the better players in Madden. And not only that, I think, in my opinion, he is the main reason why Lamar Jackson is a quarterback today. I really do. Like, you look at Lamar Jackson, he is very much like a Michael Vick. And I mean, both don't have like all the accolades, but like Lamar's an MVP twice now. He is very much. He has a very similar running style to Vic, and they run around a lot. And now, I will say, Lamar might have, might be considered a running back by some people, but his passing has improved greatly. And I think that was an underrated part about Mike Vick's game as well. They both had great arms. They could throw the ball when needed. And of course, Michael Vick has the great second chance story because after all the stuff off the field, he was given a shot by Andy Reid to come back and play for the Eagles, and he balled out there too. Man, it was just great. You want to know what's crazy? Because I knew he played for the Eagles, right? And then I remembered the odd year he played for the Steelers. Like, I totally forgot that he played for the Steelers for, like, this odd year. He didn't play very long. I don't think it was for very long. But he was on the Steelers for that odd year and then retired after that. But yeah, ultimate redemption story because, he had so much he dealt with off the field and so much hate and vitriol. But he came back a better person, a better teammate, a better player, and showed why it is worth in some situations to give second chances. Second chances can help turn a person's life around, and Michael Vick is a peak example of that. This guy is. He's a great player, one of the greater players in our recent memory, and I don't think any one of us who grew up in that era will ever forget Michael Vick. So with all that covered, I want to move on to our head pitch side and talk soccer for a bit. So I was watching Instagram Reels, and a couple of the Reels came up because okay, so the governing body of soccer is FIFA. A thing that has been going on lately is a lot of these creators have been invited by FIFA to either promote or be a part of Club World Cup promotion. Now, if you don't know what Club World Cup is, it's basically where the 32 best clubs in the world, and in this last 4 years, they all are coming to compete in the States for a $1 billion prize pot. They all are competing, and that prize pot is going to be evenly distributed among all 32 clubs. However, the winner is going to receive 125 million of that pot. My question is, how much of that money is actually going to be seen by the players? I don't know, and that's the problem, right? I love the concept that the game is coming to the States, right? I love that these big names, these big clubs are going to be seen by people in the States, and that the pandemonium and the absolute passion that comes with the soccer community is coming to the States, and that it's being celebrated here because not only that, we're having the International World Cup next year, which is really cool here in the States. So I love that part, but I don't love how not only are the players maybe not going to see a ton of that money that comes to the clubs via the pot, but also I worry about player safety. I really do. The season ends in May, right? It ends in late May, depending on if you're playing Champions League or Premier League. It ends in late May, early June. And for me, you then have to go less than a month. And if you're in MLS, because there's two MLS teams playing, you have to play in the middle of your season. You have to take a month off the league if you're Inter Miami, for example, and play in this tournament. So you're taking 2 weeks to a month off of league play, and you're sacrificing injury concerns, all of that just to play in a tournament that feels very much like, yes, it's a lot of money that could help these clubs, but these are clubs that really don't need the money. Like Real Madrid, Manchester City, they have these rich owners that could, they sign these great players that demand a lot of money. I feel like the injury concerns are, huge. Not only that, because you're playing a month after your season starts in August or September. So you're only taking a month off, and these players don't get time to recuperate and recover from the previous season. They just have to go right back into playing every 4 years in a Club World Cup that means nothing besides just pride, basically. And to me, it feels very disingenuous. And while I love the concept of the Club World Cup as like playing and getting to see big clubs play here in the States, I don't like the concept of being the player safety and just are the players going to see any of the money that comes as a result of this tournament. So moving on, we have some manager search updates here. Let's start with Middlesbrough. They are reportedly down to a 4-man shortlist. It is down to reports by the Northern Echo. It is down to Danny Roll, Rob Edwards, Steve Cooper, and an unnamed candidate. There's a lot of speculation on who it is. There was a report also that it could be an Argentinian, that someone from Buenos Aires flew into Teesside the other day and is in talks with the club. They are expected to have interviews done by the end of the week, maybe. I think this is a great shortlist. I really do. I would love to see Danny Rule coach Middlesbrough. I think he would be a he would not just be a good pick tactically, but also, he would be a popular pick by fans, I think, because of how well he's done at Sheffield Wednesday, and taking a club that, was many have considered to be poor on talent, still look decent in the championship. And with the talent that Middlesbrough have, absolutely would be a great manager to help them take the next step. Rob Edwards also is a good candidate as well. I don't mind either of those. The unnamed candidate is kind of intriguing to me. I would love to see who that is. Of course, only time will tell in the coming days, I think, because they're trying to get this done, I think, before the transfer window opens again on the 16th, I believe it is. Anyways, I do think this is intriguing. I think Roll and Edwards are probably the best picks for this right now. I don't know if I want Steve Cooper if I'm a Burrow fan, but that's just me. According to a French reporter, there has been terms agreed to by QPR with Julien Stéphan, who is a French manager who was known for winning the Coupe de France in 2019 with Rennes. And he was let go by the club last year after a kind of disappointing finish. If this is true, it'd be a fascinating hire just because there's he he's had all of his experience in French football. He wants to go international now that his career's over in the French game. But they just fired Marty Cifuentes, and he was supposed to be the next big guy to help them up, and he really didn't do it. I do feel like this would be a fascinating hire just to maybe bring some international experience into this, maybe a fresh set of eyes as well. Maybe could be what the hoops need to kind of just take the next step. I don't know if it changes much my perception on QPR. My concern is how he's kind of not really done much with Ron's since, but um I I just don't know if that's something you can trust as QPR to take you up the table. Bristol City also, because of Liam Manning leaving for Norwich City, are also looking for a new manager. Reports have betting favorites are right now Gerhard Struber and Rob Edwards. So yeah, that's the conflict of interest there with Rob Edwards, because he's also linked, like we said, with the Middlesbrough job. And both teams are conducting interviews to try to quickly get their manager hired before the transfer window. Obviously, they want that so they can have a blueprint to kind of know what to do in the transfer window and how to attack that. But Gerhard Struber was a former Barnsley manager, has some experience in the English game. He also has experience elsewhere internationally. So that could be a fascinating hire as well. Like, I could see why it might work. He helped Barnsley do decently, I believe. I think Rob Edwards would probably be the better option, but Struber might just be a very fascinating outside option. I think Struber right now is the betting favorite. And betting odds on coaches are much more reliable than like with transfers and stuff like that. So you always have to keep an eye on the betting odds, because usually if the betting odds are on a certain coach, that means probably that coach is probably going to be the favorite and is probably in heavy talks with the team or something like that. Like, for example, last year Frank Lampard was a heavy favorite with Coventry weeks before he was signed by the club. So, anyways, that's just something to keep in mind. The whole city did appoint Sergej Zakharovic as the successor to Ruben Selles as the manager. He is a former Bosnia-Herzegovina international. He was managing in Turkey, and the club bought him out from the club. Why am I not surprised that Hull bought someone out of Turkey? Oh yeah, it's because their owner is hugely into Turkish football, and I don't know what Hull's exactly up to with their entire like off season in general. Why they let Ruben Celis even go in the first place? I don't know exactly what's going on with the Tigers. I would love to know, but anyways, yes. I mean, we saw like with Frank Lampard that can work, bringing a former international player and a legend. But with Lampard, he was more of a club thing, and he played for the club and has ties to it. With Zakharovic, it's not so much a thing with the club. I think it's more because he has ties to Turkish football. We could get into the entire whole city situation there, but that would be take another podcast. But yeah, I don't know if this is exactly the pick to go with. I just don't know what Hull City are doing at this point. I don't know if they're even going to be. They barely made it past being safe in the championship last year. I don't know if they're going to be able to this next year. Who knows? It's going to be fascinating. Norwich did also reject bids by Porto for Borja Signs, one of their two main strikers. He was also wanted by Napoli, who we'll talk about in a minute. This is huge that, Signs is probably going to want to leave, let's be honest. It's just probably to who and for what price. And they might keep him, but if, like I said last episode, is Liam Manning enough to keep Borja Signs at the club? We're gonna have to see, because now Napoli are going to come calling, and they want all the players. Because speaking of Napoli, they signed Kevin De Bruyne today. The dream of him to MLS is officially dead. Chicago Fire were considered the favorites by a lot of people to get Nab, the former Manchester City midfielder, but the Italian club came in with a swoop late bid and signed him. They add him to a stacked Serie A winning team that includes Scott McTominay, the former Manchester United player. Is he a good signing? Yes, I think he is. This is probably a good move for Manchester City to get him off the books, make sure he signs with a good club. And, part of this, I'm sure, why he didn't go to MLS is he wants to play Champions League. And I'm sure that's part of why he was holding off bids from MLS, like expansion San Diego. So I'm not shocked. But at 33, it's going to be so fascinating to see, like, if he's actually going to be able to keep up the quality that he has. Like, he's one of the better creators and chance creators and attackers the Premier League has seen for a while. He's insane. He's got so much talent in his prime, and on his day, he is amazing. But right now, I do think it's a good release for Manchester City. They had to probably let him go. They've already signed Reindeers and Cherokee to replace him. So those are high-quality players as well. Great career, 10 years at Manchester City. Legend at the club, for sure. Another bit of breaking news that happened today was Thomas Frank was hired by Tottenham Hotspur as their new manager. Not long after they sacked Ange Postecoglou, who won them a trophy for the first time since 2008. It's their first major trophy, I should say. They won the Europa League, of course, and now they sack him, and now they're going with Thomas Frank. Like, this is fascinating. Like, can he turn them back into a big club? I don't know, because, like, he's been building Brentford up slowly but surely into a good team. And man, they could do well or they could do awfully. Like, they finished 17th in the league this year, right? There's not much worse than being relegated at this point for Tottenham. So, getting a guy who's solidly built a club up piece by piece and making sure that the club is going up is good, but I think Tottenham needs someone who can catapult them, because they're a top six club. They're one of the richest clubs in the league. I don't know if you can say that Thomas Frank is that guy. I could totally be wrong. I mean, this could be a quietly solid hire. I do think it hurts Brentford a lot, because now who in the world are they going to hire right before the transfer window reopens? I don't know, because they got very close to Europe last year. So who are the Bees going to hire? That's going to be a great question. Do they start going backwards now instead of going forwards like they have been? There's so many implications to this now that, like, it's mind-boggling and keeps you thinking, like, how in the world is this going to work out? And that's kind of the beauty of these new manager hires as well. You get a lot of speculation and all that. I do kind of think it's kind of a mid-signing. Like, Frank could be good, but I don't know, like I said, if you want to be building a club slowly. And of course, Tottenham have the ability to sign quality players. Like, they're one of the richest clubs in England. Of course, they're going to be able to have the money to sign players, but will they is the question. And I'm fascinated to see how Frank will now build this team in his image. And with that, that's it for this episode of the Pitch Grid. Thanks so much for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Listening on Spotify or Apple, a rating or follow goes a very long way in helping us grow. We'll be back soon with more chaos, commentary, and coverage from the championship and the NFL. Until next time, stay sharp, y'all.